So today, we're going to take a fresh look at one of the most polarizing figures of the 20th century, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran. For decades, his story has been this huge battleground, competing stories. But what happens when we step away from the black and white and look into the gray?
So let's just start with a really big question, something that applies to a guy like the Shah. Is our understanding of the past, is it set in stone, or can it actually change as we learn more?
Well, it turns out most historians today would tell you that history is not some static thing you just memorize. It's more like a living story, one that we're constantly retelling. And the Shah, he's the perfect case study for this. Our understanding of his reign has been anything but settled.
Okay, so to really get why things are shifting, we first have to look at the two traditional and completely opposite stories that have always been told about the Shah.
On the one hand, you've got this narrative of a fall of heaven. The Shah as this benevolent, forward-thinking modernizer, guiding Iran to this bright, shiny future. And then you have the complete opposite, the revolutionary story. The Shah as a brutal dictator, nothing more than a puppet for the United States, running this miserable police state. For a long, long time, those are pretty much your only two choices.
But here's the thing. What if neither of those extremes really gets it right? Stanford historian Dr. Abbas Milani, he argues that the real story is found somewhere in the middle. He calls it a gray history, one that doesn't ignore the flaws, but also acknowledges the very real accomplishments.
And this gray narrative, it's not about making excuses for the bad stuff or, downplaying the good. It's about actually embracing the contradictions that really define the man in his time and power.
Right, so this is the key to understanding him. The Shah saw himself as an authoritarian modernizer. He genuinely believed that to drag a really traditional society into the modern world, to push for women's rights, build new industries, he needed absolute power. He had to overcome these powerful entrenched forces like the clergy and the old aristocracy. In his mind, democracy was a luxury Iran just couldn't afford. Not yet.
This simple sentence from Dr. Milani's work, honestly, it's the key that unlocks the whole thing. The Shah wasn't just one thing. He was a lot of conflicting things, often all at the same time.
I mean, just look at these paradoxes. It's wild. How can the same guy who did more for women's rights than almost any leader in Iran's history also say in an interview that women can't even produce good chefs? How can a king, seen by the world as this iron-fisted ruler, be described in private diplomatic cables as a Hamlet-like character, indecisive, timid? See, this is the complexity that those simple good guy, bad guy stories completely miss.
And understanding this deeply complicated guy is so important because it forces us to rethink the one event that defined his entire legacy, the 1979 revolution.
When we think of a revolution, we picture the entire population rising up as one, right? But was that actually what happened in Iran?
Well, a Harvard University study looked into this, and they found that about 11% of the Iranian population actively participated in the revolution. Now, I know what you're thinking, 11%? That's it? But hold on, because context is everything here.
Because when you stack that 11% up against other massive revolutions in history, it tells a very different story. That's actually a higher participation rate than what historians saw in the French Revolution or even the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So no, it wasn't a universal thing, but it was an incredibly powerful and consequential movement. The real question then becomes, who is actually leading it?
And this is where it gets crazy. The truth is, almost everyone got it wrong. The Shah, the CIA, MI6, they all thought the biggest threat was communism. And they figured, hey, the Islamists could be a useful tool against them. Meanwhile, in Paris, Ayatollah Khomeini was telling the whole world he just wanted to be a quiet teacher in a seminary. And maybe the most tragic part? Iran's own democratic and leftist intellectuals, they all allied with him. They thought religion was this old, outdated force they could easily control and then toss aside once the Shah was gone.
So the revolution happened. And it wasn't just the end of a monarchy. It completely changed the entire trajectory of the nation. Let's look at the real, tangible consequences of that moment. Okay, get this. For the first time in its thousands of years of history, Iran created a massive global diaspora. Stanford University's Iran 2040 project puts that number at around 3.5 million people. But it's not just the number that's so staggering. It's who these people were.
Yeah, this was not a random slice of the population. The diaspora represents a colossal brain drain. This group is disproportionately more educated. We're talking more PhDs, more master's degrees, more bachelor's degrees than the average population of the countries they moved to, like the US. It was this incredible loss of Iran's intellectual and financial capital pretty much overnight. And this brings us to one of the biggest what-ifs in modern history. Based on Iran's economic path in the mid-70s, Dr. Milani and other experts project that without the revolution and everything that came after, Iran today could have had an economy and a global standing pretty similar to South Korea. Just think about that for a second. A truly profound fork in the road.
So we're left with this. The story of the Shah isn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a messy story of contradiction, of progress mixed with oppression, of a grand vision and some really tragic flaws. And it forces us to ask a really difficult question. How do we judge historical figures who just don't fit into our neat little boxes? There may not be an easy answer, but you know what? Just asking the question, that's where true understanding really begins.